Good morning. Thank you for coming today, and welcome to the City of Guelph. For those that are following us online, we're live streaming it. This event is an education and speaker series that we're calling CLIMB, and I have to read: Collaboration, Learning, Insight, and Momentum Building. It's a series that brings local speakers and experts together with staff and council in our collaboration space, room 112, to discuss big ideas and trends facing the future of local government and City Hall. I want to welcome today staff and councillors, Councillor Gibson, Councillor Downer, and other folks that are here with us today. And I want to introduce our panel. I'll start with, on my left, Jane
Lytvynenko
is an editor for Canadaland, the online news and podcasting organization based in Toronto. Canadaland is also directly supported by its listeners and readers, and in addition to their journalism, they focus on media criticism, turning the tools of journalism inwards to examine the Canadian media, what the Canadian media does well and not so well. In the middle is Scott Tracey, who worked for the Guelph Mercury for 20 years. A good portion of that as City Hall reporter. He left the Mercury before it closed, but kept a weekly column, which he now writes for the online outfit, guelphtoday.com, which entered the Guelph market soon after the Mercury left. And last but not least, Joey Coleman, who runs the publicrecord.ca and was one of the first fully crowd-funded independent web journalists in Canada. His work focuses exclusively on Hamilton City Hall, and his signature public service is to live stream everything. Every committee meeting, every council meeting, and other public events on top of his writing. So our topic today is the changing media context, and this is a series that was put together by our Open Government Program Manager, who unfortunately can't be with us today. But it is a series of topics that we are doing in collaboration with various departments in City Hall. This topic is done in collaboration with our communications department, and Stuart is going to take over and be the moderator for our panel today. Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you, Barb, and thanks to the panelists first and foremost for joining us today. So to the audience, is going to be pretty straightforward. Mostly, if not entirely, unscripted. We're going to ask each of the panelists questions. They're going to have a bit of a brief opportunity to engage in conversation, and then about 45 minutes or so in, we're going to open it up to the audience, and hopefully we'll have a really interesting conversation. Obviously, this is a situation that's happening in Guelph, but is relevant to communities all around the country. So to just get us going on the theme, a media landscape that has slowly evolved over the past 150 years in Guelph has changed dramatically in the last couple of months. The Mercury closing down was the loss of an institution, and a loss that reverberated or was noticed across the country. Very quickly and interestingly, we saw the Guelph Today outfit step in with an online-only operation. And the big picture, so as an example of what's going on here, the big picture trends that we're noticing nationally are playing out in real time here in Guelph. At the same time, local government is adapting apace with what's going on with media, or trying to keep up with the rapidly changing expectations of our citizens. Expectations around access, transparency, technology, responsiveness, speed, and opportunities to participate. In relation to media, citizens are now getting their information directly from the administration and through their mayor and councillors in ways that they weren't before. Twitter, Facebook, and blogs are to some degree sidestepping around traditional media as primary sources for immediate news. And the media can now watch and report on those conversations, debates, and disputes as they're happening in real time. So open government, and this is, as Barb mentioned, an exercise in open government to have these conversations out in the open and discuss these themes that are quite interesting, is different at every level of government. And here in Guelph, where the city has the most direct contact with its residents, it's about rising to meet these challenges in a way that bakes transparency, participation, and innovation into our work by design. Open Guelph is how we're modernizing our services to create a seamless and consistent experience for our citizens. It's not easy. We'll never reach perfection. We'll never be done. but the work is vitally important. Ultimately, the city and the media serve the same constituent, the citizen. It's our respective roles in this system, the tensions, collaboration, challenges, and opportunities that we'd like to explore today. So we'll start with our local, with Scott Tracey. So Scott, how did you view the role of the Mercury relative to local government in its traditional context in your first 20 years there? And what are some of then the key differences between what the Mercury did on a daily basis and what an entity like Guelph Today can do? We'll get into an interesting conversation here about the limitations and strengths about that. The difference between having columnists versus having an editorial board. So Scott, could you get us started today?
Sure. I think we're going to talk a lot about accountability. The role of the media certainly has a role to play in keeping the city and any level of government accountable by being the watchdog, and I expect we'll hear a lot about that. But the primary role of the media in the functioning of any government is simply informing readers, informing the citizens. And I think, really what the media does, and when I covered City Hall regularly, I would tell people, I go to meetings so you don't have to, because, it can be tedious sitting through a 2 or 3 or 6 hour meeting or watching it on TV. So, the media goes and filters that information and reports it back, and it helps the citizens to be informed about what's going on at City Hall. But I think it's a two-way street. It also helps City Hall to understand where the citizens are coming from, through some of the feedback, letters to the editor, comments on stories online, and so on. I think it's also a valuable way for the city to get that feedback as well. So it really is a two-way street. In terms of, where some of these outfits like Guelph Today, where they're a little bit different is of course they don't have the structure. They don't have the different levels of necessarily of editing and of oversight. So any material that's being created, the smaller these organizations are, the less oversight there is. And I think then you get on the slippery slope of, is there more bias showing because you don't necessarily have an editor or 2 editors going over everything before it gets published. So I think there's some risk there in terms of just not having that structure.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Anybody want to jump in on that?
Joy is a one-man machine, I think. You're
Okay, thanks, Jade. I was going to let you go first. That way you can't say I'm talking over you or dominating. So, oh yeah, we'll get to that point in the panel. So firstly, what slippery slope of bias? The view from nowhere is a bias. The view from nowhere is why people do not trust the media anymore. So there's always a bias. The view from nowhere has helped lead to Donald Trump. It has been disastrous for our civic government because journalism fails to call out problems until they're so widespread that it's impossible to do anything about them quickly. And then also usually it's journalists jumping on the bandwagon of public, where the public's at. And that's just an example that probably everybody's aware of right now. I have a bias, very open with my bias, but here's the great thing about my news service that the newspaper never provided. You can see my bias clearly at all times. I put every government document I can get my hands on online. I put every meeting full video online. When I take a quote from a counselor and put it in a 90-second Twitter video, 90-second Facebook video that's designed, 90 seconds is what you need for wide distribution. There's also a link at the bottom. Here, click here to see the quote in its context within the meeting. So sometimes I get in some really great arguments. I had an argument with the counselor the other day where he disputed my view that a plural counselors were mocking him during the meeting. He felt it was only one. We got in a dispute, and I was able to go to the video and show, no, it was actually, I felt it was plural, and it was a matter of opinion, based upon the facial expression. That would have never happened in the old newspaper days. It may have been a letter and a back and forth what happened, whereas my service allows people to decide for themselves.
I definitely agree with both of you in some ways. I think that there's a need for some sort of organizational structure simply because, you have to read. So you have to have somebody read over your work. It just makes your work better. And I think that one of the bigger losses when you lose a team and you become a one or two person organization is the lack of idea generation. So, you know, two or three people can look at the same document and see completely different things. And a newsroom can help parse that and figure out where they should look into. But if you're a one man or woman organization, will not necessarily catch some of the smaller things that a team might catch. But I think on the flip side of that is because there's a feedback loop online, because as you grow your audience, you will grow the views of the people who provide you with comments. You're able to sort of manufacture that idea generation from your readers and from your audience. Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. So, Joey, we'll come back to you here. So based on the work that you do, you clearly believe a digital-only crowdfunded journalism outfit can live up to the standards and expectations set by traditional media. And that's what we're talking about, that oversight, the fact-checking and the idea generation. Are there things you can do that the bigger players can't with respect to holding local government accountable?
Yeah, the local government doesn't give me any money. They're not my biggest advertiser. I can call bullshit on them and not worry about them decreasing the number of special sections that they're purchasing. You know, that's not a conscious decision that's made in the media, but, you know, every corporation knows where its bread is buttered. And that's why you've had the newspapers with that sort of view from nowhere editorial focus, and that centralist view is because they need to put out a product that has mass appeal that advertisers will want to advertise against. So I'm able to do that. I'm also able to innovate a lot more quickly. If something's not working, I can change it without going through layers of bureaucracy. I remember working in old media, and, you know, to do a live stream of a meeting, I needed 4 weeks lead time to go through all the paperwork within the organization to get the authorization to do it. Whereas, you know, today's a great example. I have the flexibility of there's no meetings at my city hall today. Today would have been a day where I pull out permits and go leafing through minutiae in the hope of finding something interesting. And I can come up here to Guelph and stream today. And it was just, this is what I want to do. My readers hopefully are appreciating the discussion. And ultimately it comes back to readers. And the other great thing is I don't need to be controlled by my readers. I've canceled people's patronage to my site before because they've tried to influence the editorial in an improper way by saying, well, I fund you and I expect you will cover this story this way. And in a corporate environment where you answer to shareholders, you can't cancel somebody's subscription as easily.
So that gets us into an interesting conversation, and I'm using Andy's notes, so I'm not sure entirely if this comes up later. But sustainability for the new breed of journalism is a really interesting. So we have an old model that is disappearing in some places, is amalgamating in others, and then something new that's coming in. And how is that working in terms of your experience in sustainability and knowing other people who are in this process?
So I'm not yet sustainable. I was very close to sustainability last year. The metrics were very good. Unfortunately, on February 24th, 2015, my council, by a vote of 13 to 2, with one councillor declaring conflict of interest, declared that I had engaged in eavesdropping on public meetings and revoked my media credential. And there was a period of time where the Ontario Provincial Police were involved, so I had to be out of City Hall for a while. Now with the Ontario Ombudsman's oversight, I'm back at City Hall, not recognized as media in any way, shape, or form, but covering. So I have to clarify that the sustainability delay is for factors that were outside of my control, but I feel that it's there. People want to be informed. People want to be engaged. And we're seeing these models coming up in the United States. They're much further ahead of us. There's also a different foundational support. There's different things in the States that help that. But CanadaLand, for example, is sustainable with over $10,000 per month in US dollars. So, you know, quite a little bit more than that per month coming in revenue. I think we're going to get there. It's going to be a tough disruption. Every revolution in society has a period of time where the disruption's heavy and people are wondering where's next. Let's not forget that the newspaper industry at one point was new and a new way of giving information, and it took them a while to be sustainable. And even then, there was only 20 years where they were sustainable, and now they're not.
Well, let's hear from Jane maybe a little bit about the CanadaLand experience from that sustainability perspective.
Yeah, so we do have quite a bit of money, well, about $11,000 per month in US dollars in patronage donations. So we are sustainable, and one of the things that we did to make sure that people know what happens when they fund us is put out a transparency report that shows exactly how our money is spent. But I want to touch on the point that you said, new models of funding. I don't know if crowdsourcing, crowdsourcing your salary basically, is really a new way of funding. I think that if you look at newspapers and magazines, they rely heavily on a subscription model, and at its essence, crowdfunding is just a different way of a different kind of subscription model. I think the challenge is cutting through the noise and convincing people that they should subscribe to your operation more than it is a question of funding. But I also don't think that there's one single sustainable model that has been proven to work anywhere. Otherwise, things would be looking a little bit better than they are now.
I want to just quickly do a distinction. I think there is a key distinction here, though. Firstly, subscriptions never paid for the newspaper. They barely paid the cost of administering the subscription and getting the paper to the door. And that was a paywall. Most of the online startups that are doing monthly patron models, there's no paywall. The people who fund me get the exact same access to the information as those who don't. I think one of the key things to keep in mind that I found very interesting in this model is that there is a very engaged segment of the public that will pay well beyond the cost of providing the service to them so that it's available to others. And I think that that's the distinction. And CanadaLand's got that model and a mix of advertising as well because you guys have such wide reach. But I think that that's how it's different than the subscription, because the subscription was you got something that you wouldn't be able to get otherwise.
Scott, take a look at this and Guelph Today is a bit of a hybrid. It's a smaller model that's coming in. It's online based, but it still has some organization behind it.
Right, and I think I was going to say that Guelph Today it has come from out of nowhere as far as Guelph is concerned, but it's actually part of a larger company called Village Media, which has a number of these sites and has been in this business for, as I understand, about 14 years. So they know what they're doing, and they don't for subscriptions. You don't have to pay anything to read it. They're relying on revenue from advertising. So in that way, more of a traditional model. But one thing I want to talk about when Joey was talking about his experience with City Hall, and after I left the Mercury, and some people maybe know this, I started a blog because I just sort of wasn't ready to not be a journalist in that way. So I started a blog and I started going to council meetings and reporting on them and so on. And the one thing I found that as a blogger, there's just not the same level of acceptance, or I don't want to say respect because I don't think I ever felt disrespected, but you don't necessarily have the same level of acceptance when you say, people, you say I'm from, it was actually called Guelph Today as well, I'm from Guelph Today, and people would say, I've never heard of it, so they don't really pay attention to you, or it's difficult to get access to City Hall. City Hall would have these budget meetings where they would have members of the media come in and have access to the budget before it's sort of presented to the public. I know I didn't have that experience because I think people thought I was still at the Mercury, but I know other people had difficulty maybe getting into those sessions because they weren't considered members of the media. So I think there needs to be a shift in terms of how the public thinks of what media is. You don't have to be from one of the big conglomerates to be a member of the media and to be accepted as a member of the media. And maybe that's what Joey's running up against. If he was at the Spectator, they wouldn't exclude him from going to City Hall. I think it's just not that same level of acceptance.
Yeah, and this gets to a really good question that is happening. It's not new, but who is a journalist? And this conversation about the ethics of journalism and journalistic integrity, and how do we, as local governments or any level of government or organization who's got somebody coming in and asking for information, understand that this journalist or this blogger or this personality on social media has integrity in a journalistic ethic kind of way. How can we understand that, and how can the journalism community maybe help us with that? And Jane, can you start us on this little topic?
Sure. A few points. I think first and foremost, there's a tendency of some governments to create problems out of thin air for themselves.
It's never happened here. Never done that.
I mean, you ask a very good question, but unless you've had, I don't know if that's something that you need to is a policy that you need to review if you've never really had trouble with it. But on a bigger scale, it's very interesting to talk about journalistic ethics, especially as more and more anybody can be a journalist and anybody can start reporting, even if some guy down the street is just like, oh my God, what is happening at City Hall? Why are there all these fire trucks? And start tweeting and asking questions. Where do you draw the line? And for me, at CANADALAND, we are big fans of this term we use all the time, radical transparency. So I think for me personally, just give access to everybody. What's the worst that can happen? If they don't necessarily follow the journalistic ethics that others follow, let their audience be the judge. I think the government's job is to provide as much information as possible and answer as many questions as possible in the most transparent way possible. And I think from there, let us take it over.
Yeah, and I think that as we pass it on to whoever's next, we're fortunate that this change in the media landscape is happening at the same time as there is a demand and also an increasing willingness of governments to open. And that culture change in both areas is happening simultaneously. And we're still learning how they dovetail. Did you want to?
So two things. One, in Hamilton, each organization has their own policies. You would think that police may be harder to get media credential from, and there is a standard of reliability, accuracy, and you have to be an outlet. You have to be a media outlet, not just a freelancer. And they give each media outlet access to a media website, and there's a little code that I have to put in each time because it's a secure site that gives pretty good, almost real-time updates to the media of here's what's going on, because they've encrypted the radios. All other media outlets in Hamilton have not been happy with the encryption. Myself, I'm a huge open data advocate. I helped found Open Hamilton, and one of the things with open data, open gov people, is that we tend to also be very strong privacy advocates. And a lot of people think that that's a dichotomy, but it's not. When you're really informed about information, you know what should be public and not. So myself personally, I'm perfectly happy that the police have encrypted their radios because of the amount of private information that they are transmitting about people while they're out there doing their jobs. And that's radical. Not a lot of my journalism colleagues agree with that, because the flip side is the concern legitimate that without the radios, there may be a loss of accountability of police. And it's my belief that the audio should be available under Freedom of Information after review for privacy, the exact same as documents. So I wanted to clarify each does that. In terms of how do you accredit, you shouldn't have to accredit. You should be in a position where a request for information, the type that you would provide to media without a Freedom of Information request, that information is easily accessible and should already be accessible by design. We now exist in an age where you can build the systems internally to automatically publish information to the internet. Traffic counts is something that you have that information, and under the present system in most governments, you have to call a media relations person who has to call a traffic tech who has to try to find the time to pull the information off the computer, send it back to the media person who then sends it to the actual media. But systems exist where you can automate the release of that information in a monthly open data format, and then you've saved yourself a lot of challenge, and you don't get into accreditation because the person who wants that data, and there's a lot of people who start blogs and websites that have very good expertise in areas and focuses, they are able to access it. One of the things I actually enjoyed on the Guelph website was that your transit on time performance is there. And, you guys are not meeting the standard that you've set, but you're telling people, here's how we're making it to that standard. And if the staff here want to go, look at open data and transit late times. Just do a Google search for that. And you're going to see how big an issue that is for people. I think the TTC was just analyzed their open data, and it was I'm getting to the point of when we talk about this and we talk about it in relation to government, a lot of times the root cause is the fact that government has not yet adopted the new technologies that allow the efficiency of delivering information direct to the public. I'm a big fan of government bypassing the media to release information because I don't like gatekeeping. I try to focus my job on gate opening.
Great, thank you. Scott, I want to go back a step again for the next little bit on the earlier question to Joey, which was some of the strengths of the new model or the new players in the game. What's the difference that you're noting that you've noted a couple of times from the Guelph Mercury having an editorial board, and that difference to now the online presence of the Guelph Today that has columnists who have opinions, but not so much an editorial board. Is there much of a difference that you've experienced in that, and how is that playing out?
Well, I don't know if there's much of a difference. Both the Mercury and Guelph Today obviously had columnists, as you mentioned. I was and am one for both organizations. So in terms of some of the opinions that are being expressed, I think those are still happening. With the editorial board and the editor who would be the person who would write the editorials in an outfit like the Mercury, that would be the organization's position. Mm-hmm. So it was written by one person, but ultimately it represented the entire organization's position on an issue. We're not seeing that with Guelph Today, at this point. So as an organization, it's not necessarily taking a position on something. But I think that there is still plenty of opinion being expressed through columns and obviously through a lot of feedback in terms of comments and things that are being left under columns and stories. That feedback from the public is still happening. So they're missing the sort of the organizational view from that perspective. But I'm not sure how troubled people are by that, to be honest.
Okay. Thank you, Jane. CANADALAND plays an interesting role in the media. Not just covering stories, but as a media critic. And how is that change? Are you now looking not just at CBC or the traditional outlets and how the media are accredited or aren't accredited? Are you starting to look at and critique the new model or players? And it's not that citizen journalists are new. They've been around a long time now, but their level of importance in the game to fill a void has changed.
We absolutely look at independent and online-only journalists, but I think the general trend, and there's obviously exceptions, but the general trend is that when your livelihood depends on you doing a good job, on you being unbiased, on you trying to get all the facts, you understand how much is at stake to keep yourself accountable. And so I oftentimes find that the independent citizen journalists or the freelancers generally do a good job because of those factors, because for them it's a huge risk, right? Especially because nothing's ever gone from the internet. You can screw up once and realize, oh God, I cannot do this again because the screw up was bad enough. Whereas bigger outlets have the luxury of being able to sort of go on even if they've made an error. Mood lighting.
Okay. Nobody had moved for a while. We've been riveted in this conversation that not even a pin has dropped. Sorry, go on, Jane.
I lost
Train
my
of thought.
point. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Well, I can't imagine why that would have happened.
I hope that was good.
Yeah. So, well, we're talking about as we go in, and now we can focus a little bit more on government, and I'll move over to Joey on this one. In general, at the local level, in your experience covering and watching, one of the nice things in Southern Ontario is there are so many municipalities in close proximity that we're aware of what each is doing, and they're basically different. It's a lab environment where we can see how different places are performing to different degrees. How do you feel as somebody who has an intense look and lens on local media that the trend in accountability is going, and not just in any one particular place, but
Ontario has 469 municipalities, and you have the range from Southgate, which is becoming a national disgrace in how they treat media, to London, Guelph right now and St. Catharines are really pushing the envelope. You have it often comes down to where are your counselors at, because the civil service has to respond to the council. And I generally find that where you have more turnover on the council over years, you tend to get a government that's more responsive. So, London and Guelph right now, I'm watching closely this 4-year term, and they're doing really interesting things. St. Catharines is trying to get caught up, and I think it's a reflective of the local realities. So I don't want to name out the municipality right now. I don't want to name out two of the municipalities. Southgate I mentioned because they're getting a lot of profile nationally for their problems with the media. But you've got some municipalities where they have bans. They're trying to ban people from having signs, and they end up in court every 6 months. And the judge is saying, "I told you your signs are protected speech." Whereas you have others that are going out of their way by taking their meetings out into the community where people are at. I think there's going to be an interesting change with the Ontario Ombudsman oversight. I feel that in Hamilton. In Hamilton, there were a great deal of restrictions on what I was allowed to do in council chambers in terms of eavesdropping on public meetings. And then as soon as January came, the municipalities out of the way. So I think that, people are coming along. I want to credit Guelph for the open data initiative here. So I didn't know Andy that well before he was hired, Andy Best, who is your manager of open government. And I know a few people that applied for the job. And I was a reference for one of those people. And there was a real sense of excitement in the open data community when we heard the rhetoric of here's what the city of Guelph's looking to do. And Andy's done a phenomenal job, but he's got the support of the council. I listened to the audio of the council meeting where you approved, I can't remember the amount of money, but it was a significant amount of money in this budget, and it was a budget enhancement back in December. And the discussion, there was good critical analysis of what the civil service was asking for, but also a sense of we've asked the civil service to innovate. So the message there to councillors in municipalities is you need to set the tone, you need to do the innovation. For municipalities like Guelph, it's the idea that it's a student at the University of Guelph can create an app that'll serve the public, and they don't have to pay to maintain the app. And by the pay, we're talking $3 to $4 a month. But for a university student, that idea that I've got to remember each month to put $3 or $4 to support this app that helps others, that government, by doing that, you take over the app and say, host it on our server, we'll provide all of those supports. You get to develop for free because you're providing service for free. That's great. I also think that what we're seeing in the GTHA is that the municipalities that are just on the outskirts of Toronto that have been bedroom communities for a while and don't want to be bedroom communities anymore are really stepping up their game. Oakville is another one I'm watching. Ajax, Pickering, Brampton, and in Brampton, I think that for Guelph, to bring it very specific to here and where we are right now, you're going to have a co-working space across from City Hall here very soon. You are directly between Kitchener, Waterloo, and Toronto. you have a real downtown core. You have one of the most beautiful church buildings in all of Southern Ontario. You have every asset you need to attract the information technology sector that you're looking to have, that younger demographic in your downtown. And a big part of that is open government, being able to be engaged. IT people are obsessed with knowing what's happening with systems. They're obsessed with local government. I have a friend in Hamilton who watches Hamilton City Council on delay, and he's in like Seattle, and he's like, I'm 2 hours behind the meeting right now because I had a conference call just catching this comment. You want a guy like that who cares so much about his local government that he pauses the live video and restarts it after a conference call to be here. And it's all about being open and having those systems and building trust.
So I'll move to Scott and then Jane on this topic, and I'll do one plug for us, and thanks for bringing it up. But bringing tech into government, we're actually working on that, and people will start to learn more soon about something we're calling a civic accelerator, which is an opportunity for us to bring the business community right into our work in our various departments to start to take advantage of the billion-dollar civic tech industry, and that's going to be a really interesting change for us as well. And we're just setting these things up, and every time we do something like this, where we've never been before, and it's the things that you guys have dealt with as innovators in the space, it's new, and we're going to keep making mistakes and learning about it, but it's an exciting place to be in. Scott, about transparency again, and accountability, how are you feeling about that? And then we'll get Jane's lens from a national perspective if there's a trend there.
Well, I agree with a lot of what Joey said in terms of what the city's doing and trying to make data more open and accessible and being more transparent with data. Mm-hmm. I fully support that. I think it's a great direction to be going in. I think where the city gets tripped up a little bit is, it only takes one example where maybe you were less than open or less than transparent, and people go, yeah, that's what they're all about. Mm-hmm. We see a press release that's misleading, or somebody refuses to comment on something, or there are sort of these rumors about something that happened at an in-camera meeting that we can't quite find out about because it was in camera. And I think those are the things that happen, and they undermine everything else you're trying to do in terms of making information available, because to the wider public they say, yeah, they're hiding something. We know they're hiding something, or they're being less than truthful. An example that I shouldn't say my favorite example, but one that I always think of. After the Urbicon decision, when the judge ruled that the city was wrong in firing the contractor that built City Hall, there was a press release that came out, and the first line was something like, a judge has ruled the city was wrong in terminating the contractor, even though it did so in the best interest of the city. The difficulty is the judge didn't say anything like that. The judge said you were wrong. Like the decision that came out essentially said the city was wrong, reasons to follow. But the press release said the city was wrong, even though we were acting in the best interests. And I think that's the kind of thing that really people will look back at that and say they're just not telling us the truth. So you can talk about open data, you can talk about open government and transparency and everything else, but you get one example of something like that, and 2 years later people go, yeah, but remember they didn't tell us the truth about that.
Right. Okay, thank you.
I'm actually going to disagree with you, but only a little bit.
Yeah, we got to get it spicy up here.
I think that especially and maybe I see this more, and this applies more on a national level, but I think that people tend to have a short memory, and people tend to be really forgiving if you're honest about admitting your mistake. I think that is the key, being honest about admitting your mistake. But I also want to hammer the point that transparency is really just good PR. Like, if you can get ahead of the story and the journalist by saying, this is exactly what happened, and these are the ways that maybe our behavior wasn't ideal, but we're going to improve in the future, then that's a much more favorable story than a journalist saying, they wouldn't tell me anything, they just, wrote an offhanded press release that doesn't actually say anything. And you have to think about, the more information is better, right? More information means a more complete picture, and a more complete picture means a fairer one. Just yesterday, BuzzFeed put out this wonderful article of their federal reporter, Paul McLeod, approaching an MP asking her a question about an awful press release they sent out. And the MP was waiting for an elevator, and Paul was just like, hey, so just wondering about this. And there was a wonderful sentence in the story, which was her response was pretty much 27 seconds of awkward silence, hoping the elevator will arrive. And then the party's excuse for her not answering the question was she was chewing gum and couldn't answer. Which is a great story for us to write, but not a great story for the MP. Which is where that radical transparency that we like so much comes in. Just answer the question honestly. Nobody's gonna fault you for making a false mistake, an accidental mistake. We're all human. Nobody here has, never made a mistake. But I think that as soon as you start hiding something or sweeping something under the rug because there's a fear of how you will be perceived, that's when trouble happens.
Okay, so that's the perfect segue into our last question before we go into questions from the audience. And maybe my favorite question, and we talk about the microscope that the public sector is in at all levels, and a legitimate microscope. And we're tasked with delivering critical services and using the public purse to do so. At the same time, we're people, we're human with frailties and vulnerabilities, and sometimes what happens is that when that microscope turns to such a narrow focus with headlines that really tear down the confidence of government, when we're trying to do new things, it sometimes leads the public service to turtle and to not want to share those failures because of what happens after. And what we're looking at is how can the public sector create, innovate, share failure in a constructive way, reasonable risk-taking, knowing that what we're trying to do is try new things in an effort to increase speed and responsiveness. They're not all going to work, but it's going to work eventually. It's that notion that we're not perfect, we're not going to be, but we're going to keep moving the yardsticks. How do we just need to toughen up? Or is there something to that notion that and maybe it's just a mix of toughening up and something that we would ask from the media for less sensational headlines necessarily on occasion with this notion of how can we create an innovating government and where failure isn't destructive and can be understood as a step forward in a process. Anybody want to jump on that one?
I got my headline: civil servant complaints. Civil servant whines media meanies.
Exactly, right? And I love, and so that's a good point. And we love the media, and the Mercury was a huge loss. So it's not the problem with the headline. I walked into that one for sure. But what is that opportunity for us to fail and learn from that failure?
Well, I'll get started. I mean, I think, as you said in your question, I think, the willingness to say we made a mistake. Yeah. And Jane touched on this as well. I think the public will react a lot better to we made a mistake than, well, yeah, we said that, but what we kind of meant was this. And, no equivocation. If you make a mistake, you make a mistake. And even beforehand, as you said, we're going to be trying some things. Some of them aren't going to work. We ask that you be, be patient with us. We're this is our ultimate end goal, but we know that there's going to be some bumps along the way, and we know that we're doing this with everyone watching. If you're honest about that up front and you acknowledge along the way, mistakes that are made or things that fall short, I think the public will be much more receptive to that than maybe what they've come to expect from City Hall, which is, look over there. I think people would be much more receptive to true openness in terms of acknowledging when things don't quite go the way you plan them to.
So I think the civil service spends way too much time paying attention to the media. I don't mind if you do, because in my case, it brings me viewership. Civil servants are some of my biggest viewers. But I think the world's changing so quickly. Journalists have a loud voice. I mean, you look at economic disruption, we hear all the time whenever a journalist gets laid off, but we never hear when an advertising rep gets laid off in the exact same company. But part of what's changing is that because the platforms we're using are so heavily controlled by engineers and software engineers, systems theory is starting to really take over. And when you communicate online, if you have a report of here's how we screwed up, and you focus on how the system failed, not the people failed, then you're going to get a much more positive response in the long term. The journalism focus is on people. It's what we do. Tell stories about people. People love stories about people. Engineers focus on how did this fail. So think about when an airliner crashes. What is the report about? The report is not about, well, geez, the pilot, we need better pilots. They go, we're not going to get better pilots. We've got the best we're going to get. They focus on the systems and how do we fix that from happening again, which is why air travel is so safe. Part of the reason why government fumbles, what appears to be often, is that when they fumble, there's this sort of let's cover it up, let's spin it, let's play the bullshit game, and then move on. But we don't learn from it. So one of the things I do whenever I make a mistake is I lay out, how did I make the mistake? Was it a human error? Most of the time it is. Can I fix that human error by improving my systems? And there was one, I can't remember, it was a while ago, but 18 months ago. It was a long post. It was like 2,500 words explaining how I screwed up. And it was on a fire dispatch call. And it was, I messed up the numbers. You know, you get a dispatch and this long string of numbers and there's a pattern. And I misread the pattern. And I went, there's nothing I can do in my systems per se beyond I've created a better separation of the numbers to separate the patterns. But ultimately, it was a human error. I apologize for the human error. I've put in that separation here. I don't know if it's going to work, but it may. And it's that change in how you approach it. Because right now, when something happens and it goes to council or it goes to senior management team, the focus tends to be on who screwed up, not how did the system not prevent that. Or in the case where the system couldn't prevent it, how do we prevent it in the future?
Jane, a last word on this topic before we move into questions.
Yeah, I actually wanted to touch on the systems thing also, but you kind of beat me to it. I think that you should definitely pay less attention to the coverage. I mean, it's really easy to get caught in like, oh God, what did they say about us today? I get that too because journalists who watch journalists. But I think that when you're trying new things, it's of ample importance to bring in people of different walks of life, to use that term. So bring in young people who can maybe say, hey, this is how we use the internet. Bring in seniors who are like, I don't know how to send an email, but I want to read the data, you know, and try to get as much feedback on your project beforehand so that you can show the effort that went in to you creating something new. And other than that, everything that these two said, just be transparent about your mistakes. Again, I don't know if anybody can really fault you when you say, I'm sorry, I screwed up. Here's how we're going to try to improve in the future.
Thank you. And I think we're fortunate that that's entirely what the open government movement is about. And it includes your points of bringing in people. So what we're doing in Guelph, or our effort in Guelph, is not to just do open data and protect privacy at the same time and those conversations around data, but it's governance. And how do we bring the citizen into our conversations, into what are our priorities, and what are the questions we're asking? So as we do that, let's actually do that right now, and we're going to open up, so I thank you all for that initial conversation. We're going to open up the conversation now to everybody in the audience to ask some questions of the panel. Has anybody got a question to start us off with? Okay. We made a mistake in government and we apologize. She stumbled and the thing broke. Well, I'll start with the first question while we deal with that. What's next? What is the next thing that, like, you know, there's so much change, and the more things change, the more things change, not stay the same. What is next? Jane, you're holding the mic still.
Sure.
Yeah. Give me a chorus.
I think the next frontier in all technology, be it municipal governments or journalism, is collaboration. Right now, a lot of journalists and a lot of smaller media outlets like Joey's, and yours also now, I guess, the Guelph Today one, they sort of are lone wolfing it. They are trying to figure things out on their own through trial and error. And I think that the next step is to connect with people across the country who are doing the same thing, because there are a lot of people who are doing the same thing. Learn from each other and not just make less mistakes and try to figure out the best way to do things together, because 2 heads, 5 heads are better than one. But also bring more attention to yourself in terms of your readers and your audience and who's watching.
Well, I mean, I definitely agree with that. I think I don't think it's sustainable for all of these very small organizations to necessarily make a go of it on their own. I think some will and it's already happening. Some will survive and some won't. You can do it sort of as a hobby for so long, but people like to pay their bills and eat and things. So I think I think there are some that are going to survive, and there needs to be some sort of structure, whether it's something like Guelph Today, which is an independent but part of a larger, a larger company, or a conglomeration of 1 or 2 person outlets working together and sharing information and so on. Honestly, I don't know what to expect. I mean, when I got into this business, newspapers is all there was, and I thought that was what it was going to be, and we've seen such a change over such a short period of time that trying to think of what comes next, it's I'm a little bit excited and a little bit afraid of where we're going from here.
Excellent. Here we go. First question.
All right. So my question is, well, it actually touches a bit on what you just said about how civil servants should pay less attention to what the media says. Except that I don't know how we can, because you guys are the voice to the public, and this is what the public reads. So we have so many media outlets. We have more media outlets now than we ever did, but only the contentious or big deal stuff seems to get covered. And there's a lot of really great things happening, really great stories, whether it's day-to-day work or innovative stuff, and those stories don't get told even when we try to tell them. Those are the media releases that don't get picked up. So, especially locally, we actually have a better time getting that stuff picked up outside of Guelph than in Guelph. So how do we sensationalize the good stories so the public can hear both?
So let me get this straight. Your good stories, you're relying upon somebody else to deliver them to your residents. And I think that that's ultimately the fault. It's why are you putting out a media release for that when you can build those relationships yourself and directly publish and build the public trust for that. The reality of the business model is that weather, crime, and traffic are the easiest to do, and they get the greatest amount of readers, greatest amount of advertising. I can tell you that because of where I come from in my life experiences and what I want to do, I've walked away from that at times, but it's been tempting. My greatest amount of viewers was during a crime story, by far. I don't think I get in a year watch for City Hall what I got in an hour for a crime story once. So that's the reality is it actually reinforces that. Pay less attention to the media, pay less attention to the old matrix. I don't know if anybody in this room did it at one point in their career, but you used to measure. You take the newspaper and you measure how much space your story got in the newspaper, and you wrote a report saying we had this many column inches this year, and that's gone. That's just the reality. The contentious stuff is what's going to be covered. I can tell you that the biggest amount of complaints I get is when some contentious thing that I know is not important is going on in a committee room, let's say committee room A, and I'm at the pension subcommittee in meeting room B. Pensions are more important in the long term. It's just the reality. The media's got to make money. They've got to try to hit as many things as they can in a day. That's why you get that. Just publish yourself.
I think, as I said at the beginning, it goes both ways. I mean, the media reports things that they think the public wants to read, and the public, in turn, as Joey said, tells the media what they want. You know, any media organization that measures their readership, what are the hot stories? It's going to be the crash. It's going to be the body found. It's going to be, you know, the snowpocalypse, or whatever the term is. You know, those are what people are reading. The flip side of that, though, I think as reporters, is you can sort of shape what people are reading by reporting on different things. So they're not reading about, you know, your great press release because it's not being covered. So, you know, it sort of does go both ways. I think the media has to accept some responsibility for, you know, shaping what people are reading, they're covering. You know, there is a built-in bias with the media, because what you report on and what you choose to focus resources on is what people are going to see. If that's not on your website, then nobody's going to read it.
I'm going to say that your city doesn't need journalists to get information out if you want it. I think that a lot of people, a lot of municipalities especially, are hesitant to rethink the way they communicate with the public. But you can also generate your own media. You can look at new ways of engaging your citizens, because they're your citizens. You don't necessarily need that middle person. And of course, it's a journalist's job to put things under scrutiny more so than it is to report on feel-good stories. But at the same time, putting out a PR release is a very inhuman way to try to connect with your constituents. What if you created a video? What if you started taking selfies, being like, oh God, stuck in a 6-hour meeting? You know, try to put a face to the things you're trying to get out there. Do your own stories. Put a video out on Facebook. Try new things. See what works. See what doesn't. And if your constituents start paying attention to it, then the media will too.
Excellent. Good. Next question. Anybody? Councillor Gordon.
Thanks very much. I'm really enjoying the conversation, learning lots. With the demise of the Mercury, as an elected official, I'm getting, and I don't know if our other elected official here can say the same, but lots of calls, concerns, comments, basically mourning the demise of what was really a cultural tradition as much as a media outlet. It's a habit that's 150 years old to be able to look at what people perceived as sort of a digest. I have personal questions as to how balanced the journalism was that we lost with that, and I'm seeing lots of examples where we can find that balance. But I'd be interested in your observations about the demographics of the buy-in to the revolution we're seeing, the digital revolution. The people that call me in mourning about what they're losing tend to be seniors, tend to be those who are intimidated by the technology. They're not sure how they can buy into it. They have the willingness, they have the desire, but it's foreign to them. So, and there's a younger generation that was raised on it, that they're buying in a huge way. So there becomes a bit of a slant then as to who's accessing it, who's using it, and I'm wondering if you have observations and or suggestions about that.
So that's interesting. There's the question of the responsibility of the media, and what are you responsible to do? And that was I think clearer with the traditional media. So thoughts on that question?
Well, great question, James. One example I can give, my neighbor is 83. He's read the Mercury for about 60 years or more. Very upset, very devastated really that he's lost the Mercury. We were talking one day, we were out shoveling snow, and I said, well, there are other sources. And he says, well, I don't have a computer. So what other sources are there? And I said, well, there's the Tribune, but you're right. I mean, that whole demographic who either don't have access or aren't interested or don't know how to use the technology, they're not able to access something like a website, a Guelph Today, or anything else. They're not even able to look at the city website to see what they're missing. So that is the demographic that suffers the most from the loss of an institution like the Mercury, and they're the ones who were buying the paper. I mean, the subscribers that were left at the end, they were the ones primarily that were there. What does the media do to fix that? I don't know, to be honest. I mean, you're not going to physically start putting out a product for them. You make the information available the best you can, which is in a digital format. But how they access it, I don't know what the answer to that is, and it's sad because there is a whole demographic that suddenly feels very disconnected from the community because of the loss of that one business.
So, as somebody who's local, I have a good idea of my demographics. Firstly, it's a challenge for you as an elected official to be involved in replacing media or creating a replacement because of the perceived conflict of interest that could occur. But you, as a municipal council, can influence by sending a letter to the CRTC. Federal policy. So one of the things that's starting to pop up in the United States, where the media collapse occurred much more quickly because it's not as consolidated media, is low power FM radio. And I'm pretty sure it's a very prevalent issue for you in Guelph. You guys have one of the CBC mini outlets in Kitchener-Waterloo, but they probably don't cover your issues very often. And then the CBC considers you part of Toronto. So, if you turn in the CBC, you get Toronto CBC, and you can't get a frequency in Guelph because you guys are sandwiched between the Toronto market and the Kitchener-Waterloo market. In a way, you have it a little worse than I do. But in Hamilton, low power FM, which is very small range signals, which is sort of your campus radio station, which gets to another one of those Hamilton Guelph things where your campus radio station doesn't capture part of your city because its signal has to be diverted away from Hamilton because Hamilton's campus radio station is on the same frequency and we have to divert our frequency away from Guelph. So ironically, you can barely get the campus radio station on campus in Hamilton because, but the CRTC, if they got into better allocating that bandwidth, you could have FM radio, which is a more cost-effective means of low-power FM radio of distributing. And it gets to the challenge of media reaching distribution. In terms of demographics, I've actually found that seniors are a huge part of my demographic. That once they get a tablet, once they get past that initial fear, which we all have of something new. Like I do that, right? Twitter, I refused to join Twitter for like 18 months because I'm like, I don't have time for this. I'm too busy. And now I basically make my living off of it. So it's education, and this is where your library can be a big asset. If you fund your library to do education courses for seniors and to lend out tablets, imagine if a senior could go and get a tablet at the library and get past that initial reluctancy to put down $400 and I'm saying it's $400 because you want to give them a good tablet that they can really use. That's how you can help, is by A, giving your library the funds to assist that demographic, and B, going to the CRTC and saying, we'd like to have low power FM in our community, because then you're going to get the non-commercial operators in.
Do you have any comment to add to that, Jane?
Just a quick one. You pretty much said everything I was going to say again, so next time I go first. But I think this is a problem that's nationwide, and it's a problem that is a very serious one, especially for communities that don't have internet access at all, not just computer access. And I think that there's a real opportunity for entrepreneurs to come in and provide some sort of digest print product, for example, once per week, to somebody who doesn't necessarily have the access or the skills for the online environment.
Another question from the audience.
Hi. Quick question. Do you guys, or are you concerned at all about the devaluation of information through what you do? I mean, similar to the music industry, which happened about 10 years before this, I mean, music has really lost a lot of its value. It's largely seen as a free thing, and it's very, very, very difficult to ink out any sort of living. Average musician in Canada makes about $3,500 a year. And I see that happening now with journalism. And my concern is that the value of information, that these small institutions, not to discredit what you guys are doing, but these small institutions devalue the information that we receive.
No would be the short answer. At Canadaland, we see a definite trend that if we do good things, people come. And not just in terms of eyeballs or how much they're reading, but financially. If we put out a good article, people are more likely to support us. We have the benefit of being a necessary service. News in one way or another is not going to die. There are always going to be things happening that need to be written about. I am a very firm believer, because of the evidence that I see with us, that if you build it, and if you build it good, the people will come. I think that it is the opposite. I think that as more and more people gain access to the internet and learn how to use it better and better, there's a real positive feedback loop in that good reporting, good stories get widely shared. Whereas ones that can sort of be discounted easily fall by the wayside. I think if you want to take an optimistic point of view, that could be a good reinforcer to do good work.
I think looking at the value, if you're saying value as a dollar value, well, news is free, right? So it's like music, it's free. And people when the people found out that the Mercury was closing, and they'd say to me, well, so what? I get my news from Facebook. I get my news from a blog. I get my news from the radio. And I said to a number of people, if there's not somebody sitting at the meeting or sitting in court or talking to somebody, doing the interview, that information just doesn't exist. You can't, if there's not a musician making the music, it doesn't matter where you get it from. It doesn't exist, right? So somebody has to create the story. Somebody has to put those words in order before anybody can consume it. And I think that's what people, I don't think, understood, and maybe why there wasn't more outrage at the closure of the Mercury or any of these other papers that have closed, because people are so accustomed to, well, I can just get it somewhere else. I don't pay for it anyway. And I think hopefully people are starting, and I know this is happening in Guelph, people are starting to realize that there is a value. There is a value in somebody sitting there doing that work and creating it so that it can be shared and consumed in any number of ways. But somebody has to go and create it in the first place.
The economics of city are gone, and I'm glad to see them gone. The economic models were based upon a scarcity of distribution. So what's occurred is not that the product is devalued, it's that the economic model has changed. In that, for example, a lot of medicines are very expensive when they begin because the economics of scarcity, they may be hard to manufacture processes, have not yet become efficient. Well, the distribution of news has become significantly more efficient. The distribution of music has become significantly more efficient. In the music realm, we probably have a lot more music and musicians than we ever had before, much like we have more information and news commentary than we've ever had before. overall, there's a net gain to society over time. I personally think that right now, in terms of culture, we're much better off than we were when just a few record labels got to decide what watered down, auto dubbed music qualified as our culture. And
There's your new headline.
I want to tweet it right now, but the point is that we are at a different model. And what's going to occur over time is that the high quality products people will fund. And yes, it's very difficult right now. Yes, in Guelph, you guys have taken a very hard hit with the Torstar deciding to just up and shut down your local newspaper and leave you with a weekly flyer wrapper. Part of the challenge is that the monopoly is such that if somebody were to launch a weekly in Ontario, they would get slaughtered by Torstar being able to pour in resources and wear them out before going back to the flyer wrapper model that exists. So it will take time. It's going to be tough, but I think we're in a better place than we've ever been before, because if I want to know what's going on with the zoning issue on my street that may only matter to 12 people in my street in Hamilton, I can go to the publicrecord.ca and see that entire zoning hearing that I never would have had before, and that will eventually come in Guelph. You're a large enough city that you will be able to support a Joey Coleman, as somebody said on Reddit after the shutdown of the Mercury. How do we get a Joey Coleman, here in Guelph? You're going to get there. Your downtown's growing. People are becoming interconnected. Even those suburbs that are south of Edinburgh, which was the city limit when I used to come up here to see a friend at the University of Guelph, they're becoming more connected into this community. You guys are going to be in a good place. It's just getting there is going to be hard.
Thank you. Another question.
I'm going to give Jane the microphone right now so that she can speak before me.
My question's admittedly a bit self-serving because I'm currently crowdfunding for my blog, Guelph Politico. But one of the things I've encountered is maybe something you can address: how to build your audience and how do you gain public trust, because shortly after the Mercury shut down, somebody posted a comment on my blog, and I assume they hadn't been before, but they were curious about it because they wanted to make sure I didn't have a political angle, like I wasn't some sort of partisan who was had any specific axe to grind. So my question is about building your audience and earning the public trust in the same way that the Mercury had. Thank you.
I think you can address this way better than I can.
So, Adam, it's interesting that I mentioned the Reddit thread, because I believe you were a participant on that thread, if my memory's correct. I live on Reddit Sundays. Yeah. So, you know my style. It's pretty direct. The challenge, there's a couple challenges that you're going to face. Myself, I had a guy come to me last summer, so I was under attack on Twitter by our mayor. You probably saw some of his very aggressive tweets calling me a liar and all kinds of other things, and accusing me of some pretty just crazy things. And I had a guy come up to me in our downtown park, so sort of similar to out here in the summer where you have people out here. And he came up to me and he says, you're Joey Coleman, right? Yeah. He says, I recognize the part in your hair. And I go, oh, awesome. He says, you refereed my daughter's basketball games in the late 90s, and you were a man of integrity then. And I know you're a man of integrity today, and that the accusations are definitely not true. And that story gets to, we often talk about me and we talk about my journalism today and my journalism career, which started in 2007. But the public reputation, it's really hard to build. That took in the 90s, and I wasn't even thinking about being a journalist. I think I wanted to be a teacher at the time. I think I was past the astronaut phase by that point. But the point is that you got to be out in the community. You've got to be involved. You've got to build the public trust one person at a time, one event at a time. You've got to make the tough calls. I mean, it was interesting when the person brought up my refereeing, because I often got some of the really tough games where they had bad coaches or bad parents. And I had a reputation of I would throw all parents out of a gym. Everybody gone. If I had to toss two parents, everybody else went, because I'm not there to referee the parents. And that, but that integrity over time takes time to build. Also, you've got to get off Blogspot. You've got to get onto a separate domain, a separate website, and distinguish your brand a little bit more. The smartest thing I did was rebrand to the Public Record. And it's been a slow rebranding because people really associate me with Joey Coleman. So I had a Twitter account for the Public Record. I couldn't get any traction with it because it's so tied to my personal brand. But you got to do those things, and you've got to be patient with the curve up. Even though there's a huge news void right now in Guelph, and it may seem to be an opportunity, the curve up is going to take a bit more time. And you also have the fact that Guelph Today has stepped in. So people in Guelph are going to watch and see how that works out before they decide to fund something else. So you have to create a niche that's separate from Guelph Today, rebuild your personal brand a little bit, be out there, and don't be afraid to do stuff that would be unconventional for a journalist. I'm on my neighborhood association. I was in a public meeting last Thursday in my neighborhood on a zoning issue, and everybody in the room, 200 people, knew that I was a resident. And one of the politicians challenged me on, well, you can't be a resident and a journalist. And I say, oh, yes, I can be both, but you have to wear the hats clearly. If I tried to be a journalist and a resident at the exact same time, that's a problem. But everybody in the room knew I was speaking as somebody who lived in the neighborhood. I hope that that's given you some good feedback.
Anything else to add on that?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Joey. Your observation that distribution is easy now. The internet makes that easy. All the various mechanisms that you guys have come up with to do journalism makes that easy. You can attend meetings. You can attend council. You can attend your zoning bylaw thing. But if you're doing investigative journalism, that's not so easy, and that's way more expensive. So how do you really address that? Because, and I'll just touch upon, like in the Mercury in the old days, they had, I'm not sure how many, a dozen reporters at some point. They had people on the court beat, people on City Hall, all those kinds of things. Now you're trying to do as a one-man show, or almost a one-man show, and you as well, and you as well. So how do you actually do the more in-depth kind of stories, and what are the limitations in terms of getting at data, since this is an open data discussion we're having here as well?
So you started by directing the question to me, but actually I will talk on the local side. Canadaland has had quite a few investigations. I'll let Jane kick that off.
I think that you're completely right in that the investigative journalism in this country is suffering, and I think it is the biggest loss in all of the media cuts across the country. Recently, Jesse Brown, my boss, I guess.
He's probably watching.
Oh, good. Spoke to Tim Bousquet, who started an outlet called the Halifax Examiner. And he launched a 4-part series into a really in-depth investigation that he did. And his model is to put that investigation behind a paywall, and he charges $10, I think, per month for that. And he said that it's definitely helping, the money's helping that investigative part of journalism that he's trying to do. For my part, I find being a part of new media is very freeing for investigative stuff. So back in the fall, we put out an investigation into the Walrus magazine, where we spoke to 20 people about how it is in disarray. And we conducted that investigation over the course of a week. And we thought the Globe and Mail was going to scoop us, so we needed to get it out as soon as possible. And it ended up being this 3,000 or 4,000 word story that did well. Yeah. And that's conducting that investigation over the course of a week is not something that you would be able to do at a more traditional media outlet. So I think that we get the benefit of not just having all of that information freer, but also being able to work on our own time, on our own schedule. You can do the day-to-day stuff, say like 9 to 3, and then put a couple of hours away for your investigation. There's a lot of different ways to approach it. I think from the side of government, the worst thing that a government can do is be a hindrance. I wanted to look into something at the TDSB in Toronto, and I was looking for data. And they sent me a 12-page PDF with all of their data that I could not copy and paste into a spreadsheet. Like, what am I supposed to do with that? Print it, copy and paste it for 3 hours? Don't do that to any journalist, please. We will hate you. We will.
Point taken. Okay, I think we have we have time for one last question. Does anybody have a wrap-up question? No? Okay.
Another counselor in the room. I'd be interested to see their thoughts.
Any comments?
One moment, Kathy. Here I come. I started, I guess, a long, long time ago in 1994, so I've seen a huge amount of change. And just sort of, I do miss the more in-depth investigation. And I think, we have the Trib, which is great, but I think they've been stripped of resources that they could, as well to be doing more, and time-wise, that they could be doing more. So that, I think that's unfortunate. So I'm just sort of noticing the difference, but I do agree. I think there's huge opportunity for us in that, the internet makes us able to more widely use it. And I think it's going to become much more a part of my job to take advantage of that. And it's just for me figuring out how to do that and becoming educated in doing that. I mean, my ward mate and I have a blog, but I mean, we don't use it as much as we should be to educating the public, and we have town halls and things like that. But I think we need to be using technology. I'm on Twitter and I use it occasionally, but I mean, it's getting up to speed on how I can use that more, because it's time consuming too. Like, we're part-time counselors, and I have no direct staff of my own, right? So it's either doing one part of my job really well, and a lot of us, have other full-time jobs as well.
Yeah. So
That's
actually,
that's sort of the whole, as individuals trying to get our messages out.
So, Councillor, may I offer a suggestion here? Because I do have a great affinity for your town here, our city. Sorry, I'm too much of an urban guy, and I go town when it's a city, so I apologize for that. I love Guelph. I really do. I have great memories of coming up here when my friends were at the University of Guelph. Whenever I had a leave pass of 4 days, I'd be up here, hanging out with them. When I covered higher ed with McLean's, I come up here as much as I could for an interview, great food. But something I noticed was that all of my friends who went to Guelph, that entire group of people that I knew there, none of them live in Guelph anymore. And they've all gone elsewhere. They've gone back home. They all talk great about Guelph. How can you tie that in? I think that, you could be in a position where the counselors could be hiring a student part-time to assist you with your communications, assist you with the drafting of them, and start tying the students into your civic life. Something that I've noticed that's been occurring in Hamilton is that in 2009, just on the tail end of me being involved at McMaster, I wrote a report in the student union saying, the reason we're not getting our transit changes is we don't vote. And I wrote a piece in 2010 on the Globe and Mail website where I noted that one of our counselors, who's very friendly to students, once the election year came, his rhetoric, changed. And I said, 4 years ago as a first year, I would have been angry at him for it. But now I realize it's not that he's anti-student, he's pro-vote. And we got the students involved on transit issues. If you want transit change, you got to go march on City Hall. And now students remain involved in civic life, and I'm seeing a lot of people who may have moved away that stay involved. So part of your solution is your campus radio station. How can you support the campus radio station? Because it has a board of directors, you have that separation between who's producing the shows and the station to maybe get a weekly show where the mayor talks about what's occurring at the city, or your city manager talks about what's occurring at the city. There's ways that you guys can do that, but I think that, you know, I'm getting to the point that there's so many challenges and opportunities that are so intertwined in this discussion of change that maybe that's an idea that you guys could pursue, even if it started as a summer position for a student to help you put together your correspondence, or a group of counselors put together templates for blogs, newsletters, that type of thing this summer.
Thank you. Are there any other comments on that or any closing remarks from the three of you? We can pass it around. Scott, do you have anything that you would like to add or close with?
No, in closing, I just want to thank everyone who came today, and I think it's important to have these discussions. I know when the conversation about today started, it was much more focused on open government and not so much on the changing media landscape, and what happened across the street changed that a little bit 6 weeks or so ago. I think it's important. It's, as I said earlier, I'm a little excited and a little afraid of what happens from here in terms of how information continues to get disseminated. I think there definitely is more of a role for the city to take in directly communicating with residents. As Joey and Jane both said, if the city is relying on the media to tell its story, it's doing something wrong. So I would encourage those at City Hall to be more proactive in getting that word out. And obviously, as we've talked about with respect to trying new things, don't be afraid to admit when they didn't go well, and it's one thing to say you're open, it's another thing to be open, and I would encourage not only to say it but to do it as well.
I would say just get into the habit of experimentation. You guys already have a really great open data initiative. You're obviously willing to learn, seeing as how we're here. Even if you're just here part-time, try to set aside 30 minutes every week for something new. Try to get into the habit of being open, of talking to the people that you're governing. And I think that as long as you start building those habits and start building those relationships, it's just going to keep growing.
So my closing remarks are, you guys, with the closure of the Guelph Mercury, it's a gut check for every community in Southern Ontario, every community, regardless of if our newspaper is owned by Post Media or Torstar. That's all that's left here. And you're in a tough spot, but the more you work to be open, the more you enable somebody like Adam to be able to analyze what you're doing well, because Adam's going to it's going to take time for him to ramp up to the point where this could be his sole focus 24 hours a day. He can't afford to be spending 2 to 3 hours trying to pull data from your traffic engineers. That story just, and getting to the investigations question. I do the day-to-day. I wish I could investigate, but there's only 24 hours in the day, and I need to sleep at least 6 of them, And my doctor tells me I need to do that. He prefers if I could get to 8. So there's a huge opportunity here in Guelph. When I look around the GTA at growth opportunities, I see Guelph as having just an amazing position. If I could position Hamilton this close to Waterloo, I'd be thrilled, because you guys have the connections to Toronto and such. And I'll close, by saying you can keep Jason Thorne as your Downtown Neighborhood Association chair, but we're going to keep him in Hamilton working on our staff, okay? So.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank our panelists for being here, and I think it was a really good conversation, and I hope one that's happening all over the place. Scott Tracey, for your decades of work here, it's really appreciated, and we continue to enjoy your columns every Thursday, and thanks very much to Joey Coleman for not only coming here and doing and being a part of the panel, but also for live streaming. And it's something that we're looking into more as an organization. And it's great to see how it's been put into practice in other locations. And Jane, thank you so much for coming and bringing that national perspective, and also from that media critic perspective. I think it's a really important role that you guys play in the landscape to have a watchdog And I think it's a fun place to see how we're moving through. From our perspective, I think there is a lot that we can learn from this discussion. I think we're fortunate that open government has gained so much traction, and that really open government is an answer to a lot of these things in data, in how we include people. And I think Jane, it was you who used the word collaboration, and that's at the heart of a lot of the solutions to everybody's problems, and how the new landscape starts to work together to bolster each other, to give each other ideas, and to hold each other up in those times when it's difficult. When you're trying to match that curve, doing it with someone will have benefits. And certainly, we're moving in that beyond engagement to collaboration with the community, and that requires openness. So it's a good time. These two shifts are happening concurrently. And thanks for everybody who is watching online. I want to say thanks to Annie Best, who put this together and is recovering from being a father of sick children. And thanks everybody for joining us. I really appreciate the conversation and the questions. Thank you so much.